A tense standoff as police pour into a hospital.
Drop the gun!
Tell me what's going on.
A patient has been shot to death, and the suspect is barricaded in the room.
I work at Advent Hospital, and there's an active shooter on the 11th floor.
It was 4 hours of tense negotiations at the medical facility in Daytona Beach.
I got a good angle right here.
Drop the gun!
The standoff came to an end after cops fired off a round of beanbags. They were
January 21st, 2023. A quiet hospital room in Daytona Beach. The sterile hum of medical machines fills the air until a single gunshot shatters the silence. Inside, 77-year-old Jerry Gilland takes his final breath. The woman holding the gun? His wife, Ellen. This wasn't a crime fueled by anger or revenge. There was no sudden outburst, no heated argument. This was something planned. A decision made between two people who had spent decades together. A promise made in love that ended in tragedy. For weeks, they had a pact. When Jerry's suffering became too much, Ellen would be the one to end it. And on that January morning, she followed through. But what happened next, no one could have predicted. She didn't turn the gun on herself. She didn't leave the room. Instead, for more than 3 hours, she kept police and hospital staff at bay. A quiet goodbye turned into a tense standoff, and in the end, Ellen wasn't just a grieving widow. She was in handcuffs, facing charges that could put her behind bars for the rest of her life. So, was this a heartbreaking act of mercy? Or a reckless crime that put innocent people in danger? And the bigger question, the one that lingers in the back of our minds, if someone you loved was suffering and begged you to help them end their pain, what would you do? Ellen and Jerry Gilland had been together for decades, partners in life, in love, and, as it would turn out, in tragedy. They weren't a couple people whispered about in scandal. There was no history of violence, no long-buried secrets. By all accounts, they were simply two people who had built a life together, growing old side by side. But time has a way of changing things. Jerry was 77, and his body was failing him. The kind of illness where doctors don't offer hope, just time. And even that was running out. His condition had worsened to the point where every day was a battle, every breath a struggle. The man he once was, the strong, independent, capable person, was slipping away, and he knew it. That's when the decision was made. A plan not out of cruelty, but out of love. If the suffering became too much, if there was nothing left but pain, Ellen would help him end it. And when he was gone, she would follow. A quiet, controlled exit. But plans made in theory don't always unfold the way we imagine. When the time came, when Jerry told Ellen it was time, she followed through on her promise. But something went wrong. She couldn't take the final step herself. The pact was broken, and in its place, chaos. The morning of January 21st, 2023. The halls of Advent Health Daytona Beach were quiet, just another day in a place where life and death coexisted. But inside one hospital room, a decision was being made, one that could never be undone. Jerry Gilland looked at his wife. He didn't beg, didn't plead. The choice had already been made. It's time, he told her. But even knowing this moment would come, Ellen hesitated. Could she really do it? Could she pull the trigger on the man she had spent her life with? Jerry didn't waver. He placed his hand on her arm and gently pushed the gun toward his head. One final act of control. One final request. A single gunshot rang out. The machines in the room kept humming, the fluorescent lights still buzzed above, but everything else stopped. Jerry was gone. Ellen had planned to follow him. That was the agreement. But as she turned the gun on herself, she couldn't do it. She had just lost the person she loved most, and now, she was alone with the weight of what she had done. The situation spiraled fast. Staff rushed to the room after hearing the gunshot, but Ellen wouldn't let them in. She barricaded herself inside, refusing to surrender. Anyone who tried to get close, nurses, security, was met with the barrel of her gun. And when the police arrived, she didn't just threaten. She fired. A shot rang out, not hitting anyone, but making one thing clear, she wasn't going down without a fight. For over 3 hours, the hospital was at a standstill. Patients, doctors, staff, trapped in fear, waiting to see how this would end. For more than 3 hours, the hospital was in lockdown. A tense standoff, a hospital room turned into a crime scene, and an elderly woman with a gun who refused to surrender. Outside the door, officers moved carefully. A SWAT team had been called in, trained to handle high-risk situations, but this wasn't a typical suspect. This was a 78-year-old woman, grieving, armed, and unwilling to walk away from what she had done. Negotiators took their time. They spoke to Ellen, trying to break through the emotional fog that had taken hold of her. They reminded her that no one else had to get hurt, that this didn't have to end in more loss. And finally, after hours of waiting, she gave up the gun. When officers moved in, she didn't resist. No struggle, no last attempt to fight back. She was led out of the hospital room in handcuffs, her husband's body still behind her, the weight of what had happened settling in. But for the people inside that hospital, the damage had already been done. The trauma didn't end when the gun was put down. Some staff members, nurses, security, even doctors, couldn't return to work. The memory of that day, the fear of what could have happened, was too much. One nurse later testified in court, saying, "I didn't feel safe anymore." This wasn't just a personal tragedy. It had shaken an entire hospital. And as Ellen Gilland faced the legal system, the question remained, was this an act of love or an unforgivable crime? Ellen Gilland never denied what she did. There was no drawn-out legal battle, no attempt to shift blame. When she stood before the court, she pleaded no contest. She wasn't fighting the charges, she was accepting them. But for the judge, this wasn't a simple case. Ellen hadn't killed out of anger or greed. She wasn't a danger to society in the traditional sense. She had acted out of love, but in doing so, she had also put innocent lives at risk. Her husband's death was one thing, but the standoff? The hours of fear inside that hospital? The gun pointed at nurses, at security? The shot fired toward police? Those were the actions that couldn't be ignored. And so, the sentence came down. Nearly 1 year in jail. 12 years of probation. Community service every month for as long as she was physically able. But there was one more requirement, one that wasn't about punishment, but about acknowledgement. Ellen was ordered to write apology letters. One to the hospital staff who had feared for their lives. One to the officers who had responded that day. One to every person who had been caught in the crossfire of a decision that had spiraled out of control. But outside the courtroom, the debate raged on. To some, Ellen was a devoted wife honoring her husband's final wish. She had done what he begged her to do, what he couldn't do for himself. Shouldn't that have mattered? Shouldn't there have been more leniency? But others saw it differently. She had a gun. She had threatened people. She had fired a shot. If anyone else had done that, would they have walked away with just a year behind bars? In the end, the law had spoken. But public opinion? That was still divided. This wasn't a crime driven by greed. It wasn't about hatred or revenge. This was a case of love, desperation, and loss. Ellen Gilland wasn't a career criminal. She wasn't someone with a violent past. She was a 78-year-old woman who had spent decades by her husband's side, until the day she had to make an impossible choice. But where does that choice fall in the eyes of the law? Some see this as an act of mercy, a woman following through on her husband's dying wish. A heartbreaking but deeply personal decision that should have been met with compassion, not handcuffs. But others argue that this went too far. Ellen didn't just take Jerry's life, she put others in danger. A hospital went into lockdown. Staff members feared for their lives. A gun was fired at police. In that moment, it wasn't just about Jerry, it was about everyone else in that building. And it raises a bigger question, one that has no easy answer. Should euthanasia laws be reconsidered in cases like this? Should there be a legal option for people like Jerry, who no longer want to suffer? Or would that create more problems than it solves? Ellen Gilland's story forces us to confront the gray areas of morality and the law. Was justice truly served? Or was this a punishment for a woman who had already lost everything? What do you think? Did Ellen deserve jail time, or was this an act of mercy? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to hear more cases that make you think, don't forget to like, subscribe, and check out my other true crime videos.